Good evening and welcome to Not Q&A. We were on Thursday night first and the ABC just copied us because they realised what a great idea it was and they're really trying to be like us in their show format. But this is not Q&A because, for one, we actually declare our biases and prejudices up front. Most of the hosts and regular contributors to The Good Sauce are right of Stalin, and we prefer ideas that have a little less Stalinism than the average in modern day Australian politics. And just one of those right-thinking contributors to The Good Sauce is Karina Okotel. Karina, welcome to Not Q&A for 2021.
Oh, it's great to be back. Lovely to see you as well, Dave, and everyone out there.
And congratulations, you were pregnant for all of last year, I'm sure, and you now have another beautiful baby boy to add to your football team.
Yes, this is true. All of lockdown, it literally is our little baby Eli. It's a COVID baby. They said that in about 13 years, there'll be the rise of the quarantines. I think there's so many people having babies at the moment. That's pretty accurate.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Exciting. And he's gooing and garring and cooing and doing all those wonderful things that new babies do, exploring a new world.
Yes, he is. Although it is strange having a baby during COVID and that whole hospital experience, very different in Victoria, not being able to have visitors and things like that. It's, been different.
Yeah, I've heard some other stories like that in other states, and it does seem a tad excessive. But I guess hospitals are where I would expect things to be a bit more extreme as opposed to the entire state. Look, our show tonight is all about something that's not anywhere near as good news, and it's the tragic news, in fact, that if not already, it's very, very likely that within an hour or two, maybe before the end of this show, that the legislation dictator Dan has imposed upon so-called conversion therapy, which is badly named, and as always from leftists, terrible propaganda, a euphemism to engender support, which doesn't accurately reflect the topic being discussed. Conversion therapy is, well, Karina, why don't you tell us exactly what they say they're trying to do, and just highlight some of the things our expert guests tonight are going to talk about as the liabilities that have now been imposed on the state of Victoria.
You're right. It's a absolutely potentially tragic day. The government are trying to push through the change or suppression conversion practices prohibition bill. Right as we speak, there are questions happening in the upper house at this moment, questions being put to the government about what is intended to be captured by the bill, what kind of conduct will be unlawful, and that certainly is directed at counsellors, psychiatrists, for faith communities, in school settings as well. So a lot of people could be well affected in terms of conduct that could potentially be unlawful. Questions being put to the Attorney General right now include if someone does want to seek themselves of their own free will counselling for unwanted same-sex attraction, whether that might be unlawful. The answers around that have been very unclear. Essentially, what is being said is that if it then results, even sometime down the track, in someone saying that they have been injured, mentally injured as a result of such counselling, then it could well be unlawful. So it's, the first time in this country that we could have a government intervening in terms of what people pray for. Never before has the government said that certain prayers are unlawful. This could, it will open the door to the government regulating prayer. And it's quite unbelievable in a society where religious freedom is supposed to be protected, where free speech is supposed to be protected, that this could be happening right this moment.
Correct. Yeah, it's devastating legislation. I'm just trying to find the tweet from David Limbrick. Let me see if I can find it. I can't find it quickly. I'll try and find it in a minute. But essentially what he was saying was that there's now a law stopping two consenting adults having a conversation. The government is presuming to interject into a conversation that two adults want to have and saying, no, you're not allowed to have that conversation. And that's just crazy. What's also crazy, in my opinion, is that the Liberal Party is not vehemently blocking and objecting to this very illiberal piece of tyranny.
Well, there are amendments being put up as we speak by the Liberal Party. Whether they'll get through, that's yet to be seen, but it's not looking good, given that the government has expressed that they won't be entertaining any amendments, despite the Law Institute of Victoria coming out and saying that they have concerns that there are aspects of the bill that are unclear, despite psychiatric associations, the Australian Medical Association coming out and saying that they have concerns around the wording of the bill and the lack of clarity, the ability for psychiatrists to provide proper counselling, or the fact that they would be in fear that what they are doing could be deemed unlawful even down the track, that they might not be able to provide adequate medical treatment to people.
Yep.
Yeah.
We will also be featuring comments from Alexandra Marshall, another regular on The Good Source, who, due to technical difficulties, wasn't able to join us tonight, but will be watching and chipping in with regular comments. So here in spirit, she says. Welcome to everyone who's saying hello. Make sure you share the show with all of your friends. Use hashtag not Q&A, not the ampersand, but Quanda. And that will just help spread the word that there is one Q&A show you should be watching tonight, and it's not Q&A. So that is really good. Welcome, everyone. Let's get the viewers up. Now, we have a special guest. I don't want to keep waiting any longer, and that's Professor John Whitehall, well known to many, but not enough. One of those brave academics and medical professionals who is calling a spade, and speaking out against the dogmatic science of leftist progressivism. Welcome to the show, Professor Whitehall.
Thank you.
Professor Whitehall, just in a summary nutshell, what are your main concerns with this legislation being passed today in the Victorian Parliament?
Oh, it's a tyrannical law. It is an action by a government to enforce an ideology. It's a new ideology. It's the ideology that there's no such thing from a pediatric point of view, no such thing as a boy and a girl. Everyone's somewhere in between and can move back and forth, except they're not allowed to move back in accordance with the chromosomes with which they were born. Now, this is an entirely new ideology. It has no basis in science whatsoever, and it is extraordinary that it is being enforced by tyrannical is hardly the right word, because it is in jail. For me, as a pediatrician, if a mother brings a child who's confused about gender, and I say, look, let's not get too excited, because the statistics are on your side. The vast majority are going to grow out of it. What we need to do is be careful, loving, compassionate, and the child is going to grow out of this through puberty. In the meantime, we won't mess the child up. Now, if I practice that watchful waiting expectation in the natural reversion, 10 years in jail, or hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines. The only alternative, the process which is mandated by this law under this weight of criminalisation, is that I would say, okay, you say you're a girl, and yeah, fine, I believe you. I'll refer you to the Gender Dysphoria Service at various of the children's hospitals, and there they are able to practice yes, we agree with you. You really are a girl. You were born with certain appendages of a male, but we believe what you're saying. You are a girl. You should have a new name. You should have access to appropriate toileting for the opposite sex. And we'll go ahead with this. And then there's hormonal options. And that is, if the child's of a certain age, in order, they say, to give the child more time to think through this enormous decision, which in fact the English High Court said no child is capable of doing that, and we've been saying that for a long time. They're saying, okay, we can block puberty, and that'll give the child more time to maturely consider whether it is in fact a boy or a girl. Now, most children who are started on that for a range of physiological reasons that I can talk about in a minute, most of them then go on to the next stage, which is cross-sex hormones. So he's a boy, wants to be a girl at this stage or other. We put him on the puberty blockers. Yes, all under that circumstances, all his authority figures are saying, yes, you really are a girl. So the starts on the cross-sex hormones, develops breasts and so forth, and then ultimately may lead to surgery. Now, under the Victorian law, we're not able to sit back and say, well, hang on a second, why are you confused? And we know that this confusion is associated in 75 or 80% of the kids with serious comorbid mental disorders, even 20 or even 30% of autism, for example. So we know these kids are disturbed right before the beginning, anxious, depressed, sometimes autistic, and so forth. So it's a very fragile group of children who are trying their best, but failing really to look at reality in a mature way. So we have them, and the other issue is that the majority of them come from broken homes. So instead of sitting back and me being able to sit back with a psychologist friend or a psychiatric friend and saying, well, let's work this out. Why is this confusion coming? What are the parental influences in it? What are societal influences? How much is he learning from the web and so forth? And if we practice that investigative but supportive, loving care, most of them will grow out of it through puberty. That's what, but I would be put in jail for doing that.
And John, your view's completely backed up by the National Association of Practicing Psychiatrists as well. They want to be able to treat children for, as you say, underlying psychological issues, not just to be forced to jump to affirming someone in terms of gender transitioning if they're experiencing gender dysphoria. So as a pediatrician, you have concerns, psychiatrists have concerns, the AMA have written in relation to that as well, expressing concerns over the bill. There seems to be such vocal opposition to this bill from the medical profession, from the legal profession, from faith communities across the board, yet the government doesn't listen. I suppose, glaring irony here is that we have the extended powers being looked at by the government for our state of emergency. The government is asking the community here in Victoria to rely on the medical advice in relation to that bill. But when it comes to so-called conversion therapy, they're saying to ignore the medical advice and to trust them that this is what is needed. Can you explain how the government can get away with completely disregarding what the medical profession is saying here?
Well, first of all, I got the numbers. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I don't believe all the members in the Labor Party understand the implications of this, but I believe a few people have imposed on the rest, one way or another, a utopian ideology. They arguing we have found the reason why people are unhappy. They don't have this ability to move from being male or to female, for example. And they believe that they have got this spiritual insight. It's best understood in this sense, a religious insight of creating a new human being. And like other utopian ideologies in the last 100 years, they therefore rely upon and insist upon and grab and use force to implement it, hence these laws. Now, and therefore, once it's said in the law, it's this is Leninist in a sense, although I don't claim that they are Leninists, but Lenin basically said all morality is subjected to the class war. In what they're saying here is all morality is subjected to the concept that you are neither a boy or a girl. All morality. In other words, there are no human rights that would be allowed to get in the road of this. All of those things that after the Second World War stopped us experimenting on children, and that's what this is. In terms of the law, there's rights of freedom of speech, there's rights of choice, rights of travel, all sorts of things are done away with. As Lenin said, all morality is subjected to the class struggle. And in this sense, all our customary morality is subject to the imposition of this nonsense that chromosomes don't matter, and it's how you think in your head as to whether you're a boy or a girl or not. That is, now, you know, the communists, and I'm not saying these people are communists, but the communists seized power was just a minority who believed that they had found a reason for living and a reason for doing all this sort of stuff. They had been chosen by history, and therefore they used the force to overcome opposition. I don't think we begin to understand this until we see it in that utopian concept. This is a religious, spiritual issue.
Absolutely, very well put. That was very clear during the discussion. Fiona Patton from the Reason Party, formerly the Sex Party, whose motto is "Get religion out of politics." She was very vocal in that respect, and even referred to the Satanists who'd written to her endorsing the bill because they didn't want people to be able to access prayer or exorcism, because it was quite incredible. I would encourage people to go back and have a look at Hansard tomorrow and see her speech and comments in relation to that. It, you know, definitely there is a lot. But I mean, a lot of the rhetoric around
this whole business of saying this.
Sorry.
What's this exorcism? Who practices exorcism? That's ridiculous. That's a kind of a straw man, a horrible straw man, a spectre drawn from the Middle Ages to stop intelligent debate. That's what all that is. Look what's going to happen if you don't turn this little boy into a girl. Look what's going to happen. All these horrible spectres are going to happen and so forth. That's a manipulative tool. They don't want to address the real science of the matter, is that most of them are going to grow out of this in the first place. The second place is that puberty blockers are not going to help them think straight. They have been shown in very, very pedantic laboratory situations, for example, with sheep, that they interfere with the way you think. They interfere with the limbic system, which coordinates emotion and thinking and ambition and reward and so forth, and leads you in a path of pursuit of human identity. That's messed with by the puberty blockers, and the sheep don't behave in the same way. They don't think the same way, and they prefer, therefore, not to be challenged by new things. So we're putting a kid onto these things allegedly to let it think straight, but we're messing with the limbic system, and we are in fact encouraging it not to think beyond its confines. But more than that, this is an issue of whether it's going to be thinking it's a boy or a girl. And what the puberty blockers do is that they, first of all, interfere with a primary midbrain center of sexual orientation. They stop that working, and then they stop the secondary influences that come at puberty with testosterone and estrogen. So here you have effectively neutered this child. You have affected the integrating part of its brain, and you have denied it the influencing of the sex hormones, and you then think that somehow or other he's going to work out more clearly whether he's a boy or a girl. It's complete nonsense. This is not my nonsense. I didn't do that research on the sheet. It's on the web. Why don't these people look it up? If I can look it up, they can look it up.
Well,
it's contrary to research was out there.
Oh, absolutely. Look, there were many submissions, including by peak medical bodies in relation to this legislation. In terms of the reasons given by the government as to why this bill should pass, there was no mention of those views, just simply that, everybody has different views. Completely ignored the submissions of the medical bodies and focused very much on, experiences of people and horrible experiences people have had in the past, but completely focused on what occurs within faith communities, and that was pretty much the extent of it. There was no reflection on the views of the medical community, which is absolutely unbelievable and so disappointing.
Very much. Professor Whitehall, thank you for those expert comments. If you would like to hang around, we may have some more questions for you in just a moment. But before we bring in our next guest, I'd actually like to share some comments from some people I might not usually have much in common with, the Victorian Women's Guild. Let's have a look at what they've got to say. They say, "We, feminists and lesbians, call on Victorian MPs to oppose the chilling Change or Suppression Practices Bill. This bill is designed to suppress feminist thought and lesbianism. It is not a feel-good declaration against gay conversion therapy. We unequivocally oppose harmful and archaic conversion practices. However, the bill is fundamentally flawed, and we believe it will do more harm than good. We are concerned the bill will harm the people it seeks to protect, consequences which may be unintended but predictable. The bill outlaws CSPs. What are CSPs? A practice or conduct aimed at changing or suppressing a person's sexual orientation or gender identity. The bill gives examples of practices: therapy, well, how terrible; prayer, wicked; and exorcism. Not an exhaustive list, but no examples of conduct. A single conversation could be CSP. Parents, teachers, youth workers who suppress a child's gender identity could be captured. We know that young lesbians struggle with if they are lesbian or trans. A parent who says child is lesbian rather than trans may be suppressing gender, but supporting sexual orientation. So is their conduct outlawed or not? The bill says that affirming gender identity is not CSP, so it seems that saying to the teen, maybe you're lesbian rather than trans, probably is targeted. Health service providers have such wide defence available to them, so as these legal academics say, they probably will not be prosecuted under these laws. What is the point of a law targeting health providers if it won't result in prosecutions? They do go on. I'm not 100% sure that it's all going to be super relevant, but it's very interesting to note that they're observing the fact that this is a one-way prescribed conversion enforcement. There's only, if a question of sexuality or gender arises, there is only one satisfactory answer according to this, and that must be in line with the Daniel Andrews progressive dogma. They are literally legislating ideas. Now, one such person who has a testimony, a personal lived experience of once experiencing feelings of same-sex attraction and living a homosexual lifestyle, and now calls himself ex-homosexual, is James Parker. James, welcome to The Good Source, not Q&A. Did I get your name right?
You absolutely got my name right. Thank you very much indeed. It's good to be with you today.
And you. Now, I actually personally don't know a huge amount of your story, although you've been very active and had a high profile in the marriage debate, and so much more, defending right thinking. Tell me, what's your take on this bill? Why don't you give us, actually, for those people like me who maybe don't know enough about you, Give us a little bit about your story, your background, and what qualifies you to have an opinion that should be listened to as much as anybody else in this whole conversation, please.
Well, I've try and get this as short as I possibly can. I got a crazy past, but I came out at the age of 17. I was the first guy to come out in my high school, and I was the first guy to come out in my university at the age of 18. And I established a lesbian and gay group, and I got very, very heavily involved, not just in gay activism, but in also discussions around gay strategic planning. And that's why I'm particularly interested in this bill, because this bill hasn't just come out of nowhere. It has literally been planned for many, many years. And part of the plan, certain discussions I was part of back in the late 80s, is that the LNG community in those days, there was only lesbian and gay in those days. There wasn't LGBTQIAP plus 2S as there is today, and probably a few more letters. But in those days, what happened is the plan was to actually bring about homo superiority. And basically, the conversation went like this, that we as the gay community needed to infiltrate and take leadership in entertainment, not difficult, in education, might take a bit of time. That certainly happened. Politics, religion, in the military, in healthcare, right across the board in society. And then also they said the world of sport. And one guy said, yeah, but sport's going to be really difficult. And one of the other British guys I was with, we were talking to some Americans at the time. He said, why will sport be difficult in this? He said, well, to play sport, you've got to have a body, and your body screams male or female. And we have to get rid of all of that, is what the comment was. And I remember at the time thinking, this is ridiculous. We haven't even got homonormativity. We'll never have homo superiority. And we definitely will never get rid of male and female. And I look at the situation now, 30 years later, having been there, having lived in a long-term gay relationship. And then what happened, it was in the midst of that relationship that I actually began to realize that I got a bit of emotional stuff going on inside of me. Most people do. So I went into therapy. Just regular therapy, cognitive therapy, behavioral therapy, the normal stuff, you know. And what happened there is I had an amazing therapist. And there's no way I could leave my sexuality or my sexual attraction outside the therapist's room. You just couldn't do it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be in the room. So I entered into the room, and my therapist was amazing and began to just prod about a little bit and ask different questions. But overall, rather than me living on this surface and living out of this label, this socio-political label, the therapist I had to begin with began to ask me to ask myself different questions. And I asked myself a number of different questions. And this is what I came up with. I came up with the fact that I'd actually been sexually abused for 3 years as a child, between the ages of 8 and 11. I had been misgendered from a very, very early age. From the age of 3, actually, I was sent to an all-girls school from the ages of 4 to 5. I then went to an all-boys school, and I was given all the female roles in that all-boys school. Even in my first year in high school, a co-ed high school, I was given the leading female role in a drama. And what happens is this is literally my environment and the situation around me and what was done to me had deliberately, it had certainly formed me to be this out gay man at the age of 17. But I wasn't just an out gay man. At 18, I was then wearing makeup. I was incredibly feminine. My voice was much higher. My walk was, what one would say, was mincing, you know, very, very feminine. I've probably done pretty well on RuPaul's Drag Race, really. But the therapy itself began to undo all of these things. Nobody forced me. Nobody pressured me. What happened is I began to find deep, deep inner resolution within myself, such to the point that I stopped finding men attractive. And I began to find women attractive, and nobody was more frightened than me because I was told that I was born gay. That's it. There's no such thing as change. And I've met hundreds of people since who changed. I got married. Today I'm a father to a beautiful 12-year-old, and my life's never been better. And I work with literally hundreds of other people in Australia and further afield who've been making this similar journey as well. Nobody's forced anybody. Nobody's forcing anybody. These exorcisms and these, these electric shock treatments and these ice baths and bashings and all these things that are spoken of, these horrendous practices. Well, nobody's into those. But those things haven't existed around Australia actually for years, and certainly not in the area of human sexuality. I know a number of people who are profoundly depressed in the gay community who do have electric shock treatment, and that's because they've never been properly diagnosed, and therefore their depression is getting worse and worse. That's a bit about my background.
Why do some? I'm surprised you're talking about shock treatment. Who has shock treatment and why?
I know two. Well, actually, I don't know two people. I only know one person now, because one guy, one friend of mine who had his gay marriage about 18 months ago, he committed suicide 3 weeks ago, and he regularly had electric shock treatment under the state here in Australia. He was given electric shock treatment because his depression was so bad, and he took his life 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Wow! Oh, that is so tragic.
So I mean, you know, it's, and of course the challenge is this, and is nobody helped him to look and address what the underlying issues were in his life. Nobody did that, you know. And I mean, I wasn't permitted to go near him on that type of a topic, and I'm really sad about that. Otherwise, I think he'd still be alive today. But there's only two people I know who have this treatment, but because of their severe depression.
So to be clear, because of depression, not because of sexuality.
Well, no, because of depression. However,
the
challenge is this, you see, and this is what we've seen from the Free to Change research that the government has been ignoring, that might have been previously mentioned on here, is the fact that actually, you know, greater majority of people in the lesbian and gay community struggle badly with depression and with anxiety. And often when we look deeper beneath the surface, there are root causes there. This is the same is very true with a child who says they want to, you know, the boy that thinks he's a girl and the girl that thinks she's a boy. You know, there's nearly always deeper issues there that need to be addressed. And of course, what's happening is, you know, our state health authorities, for the most part, they're cutting corners. And therefore, this bill, to some extent, works for them, because it means they can keep cutting corners rather than actually say, hang on a minute, we need to do more work around this. We need to look really very carefully and seriously at the lives of people who believed that they were in the wrong gender, but realized they weren't. Or those people who have fully and utterly lived the LGBT lifestyle and have walked away and said, this isn't me. Not only it's not me, but my life is significantly better. I'm not costing Medicare as much. You know, I'm sustaining commitment to work, commitment to people. Everything is better. Isn't that good news? Shouldn't we be looking at that? And this government isn't doing it. The Victorian government's not doing it.
David Limbrick MP asked this question: are the Liberals, apparently really badly named, really going to support legislation that prohibits private conversations between consenting adults? That you'd have to call very illiberal legislation. Are the Liberals really going to support two adults having a private conversation because they don't approve of the contents of that conversation? The legislation is ill-conceived at best. But James, what does it mean to you that this legislation is going to prevent somebody like you from seeking talk therapy to address some of these internal turmoils, or for that talk therapy to then have excluded by law any possibilities of suggesting that perhaps these other conflicts resulted in your feelings of same-sex attraction and gender confusion?
Well, I'd say I'm already seeing effects of these laws in Queensland and the ACT. And they're not half as draconian what's being put forward in Victoria. People who've been doing really well in therapy and, you know, becoming more buoyant and leaving behind their anxiety and the depression, they're now moving back into that place of anxiety and depression and actual suicidal ideation. So everything that this bill says or promises it's going to sort of prevent, which is, you know, it's going to save lives and it's going to be much better, it's not going to be, it's going to stop harm. It's in Queensland and ACT, the opposite is already happening. And the same is going to happen in Victoria. Only what happens is I mean, how dare Victoria turn around as a state and really bring about legislation that deeply affects everybody else across our nation, and turns around and could penalise me for having a conversation with somebody in Victoria just by sharing my own story and saying what happened. I live in Western Australia, but I often travel. I often travel in Victoria, And I have many, many friends there in Victoria who are profoundly, profoundly anxious today. And I'm watching literally years and years of great therapy, and in some cases prayer, being rapidly undone. And this is all in the name of freedom. It's destruction in the name of freedom. It's diabolical.
We've got this.
Oh, sorry.
I just want to read this comment from Ellie Melly, Alexandra Marshall, one of our regular commentators on The Good Source. And she says, sadly, it's not about the individual's mental health. It's about how many people joined the radical LGBTIQAX plus political movement. Leaving is like a woman who turns her back on feminism. James, if you'll forgive me for jumping ahead of you, Karina, on the back of Ellie Melly's question, what's it been like for you as an ex-gay? I don't know if that's a label you like or not like, or if there's a better one, but what's it been like for you to leave the LGBTIQAX plus community?
What's it been like for me? Well, let me put it this way. I experienced nil homophobia 3 decades ago when I came out. And I came out, as I say, the first person in university. I was carving the way, all these things. In fact, people patted me on the back. But ever since I made the decision to actually turn around and just to reject a label, partly because what happens, my feelings were no longer, fitting of that label, then what happens is I regularly, on an ongoing basis, get all sorts of threatening texts and just really nasty things said about me, and a lot of defamation as well. But you know what? I have an inner peace and an inner resolve today that all I can say is bring on all the rubbish. I don't care. I'm happy. I'm content. I got just a deep sense of inner peace. I love being a man. And I had no idea what it was to be a man. I mean, I was a perfect textbook case for somebody who's going to turn around and to transgender. And today I know people who have detransitioned. I know a number of people in the UK and here in Australia, and their lives have been literally ruined. And these are some of my heroes because I'm watching them take literally pockets of ash and trying to bring a garland of beauty, or to let a phoenix rise out of this ash. These are some most incredible people. And I'd rather hang around with them than some of the radicals who are trying to fill everybody with fear and shout homophobe and intolerant and bigot, etc. We're not intolerant and bigoted. I wish them no harm whatsoever. They have the freedom of their choice, but they have no right to take away our freedom to also make our daily choices as well.
The evidence of your life is terribly inconvenient for the agenda of Daniel Andrews and
terribly
LGBTIQAX plus mafia. Karina.
I found it quite unbelievable that the government basically has completely ignored people who have left the gay community, people who have detransitioned. In terms of the parliamentary debates happening today over this legislation, no mention, completely ignored. How does it feel to basically not have a voice in this debate, can be ignored, and the only voice that is being amplified is that of people who have had negative experiences from so-called conversion therapy practices?
Well, what does it feel like? It's not pleasant. Of course, it's not pleasant. But you know something else? The other thing that happens to those of us who've rejected the LGBTQIP plus 2S lifestyle and labeling and realize, in some ways, I'm no longer a gay or whatever, but I'm just me. I'm me on my journey. And everybody who I meet, irrespective of their sexuality, and I've got lots of friends who are questioning all sorts of different things, and others who say they're very, very confident about what they think and feel. But to me, they're just individuals on their life journeys. So what does it feel like? It does feel like somehow that I've been erased. However, I noticed that in the midst of this law, the LGBT community themselves are getting very, very frightened. They're getting frightened because more and more people are leaving the gay community, are becoming insightful to the fact that actually, for the most part, and certainly not everywhere, it can be an incredibly toxic environment, or rather the long-term outcomes are not good for people's health overall. So different people are leaving for all sorts of different reasons. And I'm seeing people who are making incredible strides just by leaving the LGBT community and not really undergoing therapy. They're going online, they're doing their own research, they're finding out their own information, they're finding their own help, in different ways. And also, really deep down, is this about homosexuality or transgenderism? I'd say no, it's not. They're two words that we use beneath which there are many, many other issues, numerous issues that need to find resolution. So even if these laws pass, people are still going to actually go ahead and find resolution of some of those deeper issues. It's going to be impossible to stop that happening. So there's going to be more and more people that ultimately leave the LGBT community. That number, I do believe, will grow. And then what happens is there will literally be a stronger counter witness, as is already happening globally now. It's not just me in this nation. I literally have the names of hundreds of people who have a very, very similar story to me. And I think what's happened is the pot has been stirred and people are now starting to get ready to start telling their stories. And we're going to tell our stories. And, you know, they might try and throw us in prison for 10 years or fine us $200,000. That'll just make an incredible news story, because basically here I am, a victim of rape, a victim of years of sexual abuse, a victim of misgendering, and they throw me into prison because I say my life got well. Think about it.
That's, yeah, it's quite a powerful testimony. Are you willing to be a test case, Jane?
I've got my bag packed already. Yeah, a toothbrush and a comb. That's probably about it for my prison cell.
Professor Whitehall, have you got any reflections on what James has shared for us before we bring in Terri Kelleher?
No, I don't. Hello, James. I'm always moved by your story. I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle. I'm trying to protect the children. I think the children are going to be irreparably damaged in this. These drugs interfere with their brain. There's a rising prevalence of changing their mind, in which case their brain has been damaged, their body has been damaged, and now they've suddenly come to their senses. And it's not coincidental, therefore, that the rate of suicide is 20, even 30 times, in some people's estimations, higher in people who have transgendered themselves and then regretted it. So they have not found any gold at the end of this rainbow. That's the basic issue. There's no happiness to be found there, as is promised. You know, they promise happiness in my entire medical career. Nobody ever promises anyone happiness. You can't say, take this penicillin pill, it's going to make you happy, or I'm going to fix your broken bone, this will make you happy. Now, people who are pushing this are promoting the H word. You do this and it will bring happiness to your life. Well, the statistics are not that way. The statistics is a much higher rate of suicide. So I come into it slightly different. I have had a life of looking after sick children. That has been an enormous privilege. And I actually feel awful that we in Australia are experimenting on these children in the name of a utopian ideology. And that's what we're doing. I can't understand it. It's horrible.
Would like to also introduce Terri Kelleher, who is a lawyer and is from the Australian Family Association. She has been looking at the change or suppression conversion practices prohibition bill very closely and has a lot to say about the flaws in that bill. Terri, welcome. Could you unmute yourself if you still are on mute?
I know I am unmuted.
No, thank you.
I am unmuted. You can hear me. And
yes,
thank you for inviting me on. It's a pleasure. I do apologise for my ragged appearance, but I'm exhausted. I've watched the live stream all day. It's been debated in the upper house. Unfortunately, the numbers just aren't there, but it's been very, very strongly argued. And I've watched the debate all day, except when the live stream went down and over dinner. They are still debating, and I've been told by someone in the chamber that they are going to vote on it, and so they are going to be there until the vote is taken. They could be there until the early hours of the morning. They're going through it now in committee stage. But anyway, look, I'll wait for you to ask questions if you like, if people want to know what you want to know about the bill.
Certainly. Terri, I imagine you've been watching the questions that have been put to the Attorney General on the bill. Is there any clarity coming out in terms of if someone themselves, just as James has shared, without any kind of coercion, wants to seek counselling out of unwanted same-sex attraction, for example, or a parent who wants to seek second opinions if their child is experiencing gender dysphoria, what elements of that might be unlawful? It's quite
disturbing. Well, Karina, every element of it. Now, that was one of the main points, of course, that in Victoria, unlike Queensland and the ACT, conversion, change and suppression practices, even if they're consented to, whether with or without consent, are illegal. Now, I can give you the words from the Attorney General's mouth. If you'll bear with me, I have to look at the notes I took. She said, you cannot consent to a change or suppression practice. It is always harmful, so you can't consent to it. It's like you can't consent to being sold drugs because it's illegal. You can't consent. And she says you can't consent to it. It's always harmful, and it doesn't matter how long it takes for the harm to emanate, but you can't consent. So there you are. So one of the, I think it was one of the Liberal Democrat members actually pushed her on this, or not pushed her, but asked further questions. And in the end, she had to say, well, yes, if you want to, if say you want to change your same-sex attraction, or you don't want to transition, or you want to detransition, well, you can do that and you consent yourself, but you're on your own. Mm-hmm. You can't seek any help to do so, because the assistance given to you to suppress your gender identity or sexual orientation would be illegal.
Yeah. And that's
utter madness.
Yeah.
I cannot believe those words. I've taken them down.
Yep. It is quite unbelievable. And, James Parker was expressing before, the support that he received and the support he also provides others who are questioning their sexuality, their gender.
Yes.
That, James, you said you've got your bags packed, ready to go to jail over this.
Yes. Well, I'm just deeply offended. I'm just deeply offended that the Attorney General should turn around and take that consent.
James, it's serious. So I hope you've got the right toothbrush and the right toothpaste and pairs of undies, because you could be up to you could have up to 5 years imprisonment if you only cause injury. If it causes serious injury, you could be in prison up to 10 years. Yes. And the fines are very severe: $98,000 for injury, and about nearly $200,000 if it's a serious injury. And it will capture you even over in Perth, because Clause 8 has it operates. The Act is suppressed to operate even if the change or suppression practice is provided outside Victoria, as long as it impacts someone in Victoria.
It's just a real shame that they're not willing to listen. It's a shame they're not willing to listen to all the really positive stories that are out there. Endless stories of people whose lives have been saved.
Yes. How utterly predatory. There's so many words for it. It would be hard to hyperbolize just how utterly predatory this legislation is, harmful to the people it's intending to help. How typical of progressivism, pardon me putting my partisanship on, but I think progressivism, quite honestly, is the complete opposite of Christianity. Truth is objective, and there is no progress from truth. When you've got it right, trying to progress from that reduces how much you have it right. When you've got justice, progressing from that is just eroding and changing and morphing justice. It's not doing any help. And this is so typical of progressivism. Taken to its logical conclusions, it only starts hurting those it's trying to help, and then accusing those who don't come with them of being the ones who commit the harm. It's so infuriating. Is how to make these people who will not listen, who will not see sense, who follow science when it suits them and throw it out the window when it doesn't. And now they're just turning their entire agenda into a war and literally promising to put people in jail who have a different religious belief to them. And they are religious about their LGBTIQAX plus dogma.
Yes, they are. It is an ideology, Dave. It's an ideology that's being imposed. Now, what you have to understand about this bill too, there are two parts to it. One is the criminalising of change and suppression practices and complaints being made. And complaints can be made by a third person, by the way. It doesn't have to be by the person who was supposedly harmed. So they're criminal offences, and they will go into the courts. They'll be handled by the police. The other aspect, the other main arm of it, is the investigatory and educative function that's been given to the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission. Now, that is wide-ranging. This is really serious stuff, Big Brother, because they are going to educate the community so that they understand, the community understands why change and suppression practices are prohibited. And they have an investigative function, and they've been given extra powers in order to investigate if there is any report to them, not a complaint, but a report of change or suppression practices. That will mainly be targeted at organisations. Can you see that that's a different arm? It's called the civil response scheme. So we're all to be re-educated. And there's such concern in the community already about, well, what can we say? Does it cover speech? Now, we've raised this and we're very concerned about whether it covers publications, even interviews like this. You know, if someone was an LGBT person happened to be listening and then says, well, you know, I really felt induced by listening to that program or reading that article to attempt to suppress my gender identity, well, that could be a change or suppression practice. So that is really serious for publications and for the media, also for teachers, of course, and the faith-based schools are very concerned. Now, it was denied during the debate that it would apply to statements of belief. So if you're just teaching statements of belief and you're telling, you know, the children, say in a faith-based school, this is what our teaching on human sexuality and the expression of your sexuality is, that would be all right. It's just that you're not to tell them they're broken. But how are you to make that distinction if you are saying, well, you know, this sort of behaviour, sexual behaviour is morally illegitimate? That's basically what you're saying. Well, how are you going to say that's not saying to someone who is same-sex attracted that what you are doing is, you know, well, it's not actually right. Can you see what I mean? How are they going to distinguish?
I'd say this to you, Terri, is that what's happened is the plan, of course, before this was to bring about safe schools, and safe schools isn't spelled S-A-F-E, it's S-S-A-F-E. Same-sex attracted friendly environment was the original name. And what's happened is we have literally now, Daniel Andrews in all government schools across Victoria, he's literally sexualised children and confused them from such a young age that now what happens is that normal, healthy development that brings people into a good place in their own attraction and etc. and feeling good about themselves as sexual beings, for the most part, that has been absolutely crippled. So what's happened, he's left everybody broken. And now what's happening, he's got himself and his staff around him to say, none of you are broken. Again, it's almost incredulous that this is happening today. But this literally is the plan. And I'm going to be, it might sound a bit contentious, but I recently revisited some of the communist goals, and three particular communist goals struck out to me as well. If you don't mind me reading them to you, number 26 was present homosexuality, degeneracy and promiscuity as normal, natural and healthy.
Are you serious?
Yeah. Number 39 of the communist goals is dominate the psychiatric profession and use mental health laws as a means of gaining coercive control over those who oppose communist goals. And number 41 says, emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of parents, attribute prejudices, mental blocks, and retarding of children to suppressive influence of parents. And that's exactly now what we're seeing rolled out. So I don't think
even
this is just
using
an
the word
independent...
suppression. Yes.
Absolutely.
Even
I don't
using
think
the
this is
word
just...
suppress, James.
Exactly.
Terrible.
I agree with Terri. I don't think this is just an independent Labour government. I think there are much, much deeper powers behind this. We know that Ros Ward was very quick to admit that she was a Marxist and that she had much more of an agenda than just trying to stop anti-bullying in our schools. And we can see the damage that's done there to many, many children. And as Professor Whitehall has said, it's the children we have to think about. It is the children today that are suffering. And I'm seeing more and more 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds who are coming forward. They have no idea of their identity. They have no idea of who they are. Because what's happened is, literally, they're almost scared to have an opinion, never mind to ask a question. So this is very, very serious. I'm fearful for what's going to happen in our children in years to come.
I'm very, very critical of the Liberal Party in this. Like, I expect the radical Labor Green left to come up with stupid, pernicious, evil legislation that's pro-death, anti-family, anti-Christianity. That's par for the course. And that's, apologies to those Labor members who maybe are Christians and doing the best they can in a terrible party. Your party is terrible. Thank you for trying to hold back the floodwater. However, the Liberal Party, I just don't get why you would give any comfort to this at all. VJ E. Matthew asks the question a little while ago, is it that the Victorian Liberal National Party, their coalition, doesn't want to oppose this, or is it that they simply don't have the numbers, assuming that they think perhaps there's some political advantage to voting for something they want to vote against if they know that voting against it wouldn't have any effect, so they might as well get what political advantage they can. What do you think, Karina? Is there any merit to that question?
Well, the Liberal Party are putting up amendments to the bill, and they are actually recognising the medical opinions out there, the legal opinions out there. They are actually listening to and acknowledging the voices of people who say that they have benefited, as James has expressed, from counselling out of same-sex attraction. They're not ignoring all of those voices. They're not ignoring medical advice, as the Labor Party are doing. They are not coming at this from that purely ideological point of view, where this kind of legislation is to control people and essentially mute their free will to be able to access the kind of counselling they may want to have. Whether those amendments will get up, I'm not sure where the debate was at, Terri, when you were last on, but having a look at it. But
well, I can tell you, just before the live stream went off again, which was at 8:20, the amendment that Ed O'Donoghue, who is the Shadow Attorney General, put forward, which was the bill should be withdrawn, go to a committee for proper consultation and consideration of amendments, was voted down 16 votes to 19. Right. They don't have the numbers. That's the short answer. They don't have the numbers. They've argued very, very strongly, and so have some of the crossbenchers. In fact, most of the crossbenchers are opposing it. Most of them are, but it still doesn't give a majority, even if all of the coalition voted to oppose. So they're not voting in favour, but they're not going to oppose it because they're concerned that, there is some difference of opinion in the party. So I really think that they would discipline the party if they could get the numbers, but they weren't going to be able to get the numbers. I can't go into the explanations, quite involved, Karina, you know, but they weren't going to get the numbers. But the
I don't think there should be.
Three of them were very, very strong.
I don't think there should be a compelled vote on any politician. I don't think the Liberal Party should ever make somebody vote for good legislation. I actually really believe a politician should be able to do a very bad vote and then be ejected by the pre-selectors at the next pre-selection. Let's have candidates who will vote according to their conscience as opposed to party lines. That would be my personal preference, because then let's make sure we pre-select candidates who are going to make good moral choices when these difficult decisions come up. This comes back on us. If the Liberal Party in Victoria is failing to oppose this bill, then the Liberal Party members are the ones to hold to account. They're the ones to blame who let these kind of people in. And if you're living in Victoria and you're blaming Liberal Party members for the Liberal Party politicians, but you're not a member of the Liberal Party, well, then it's your fault as well. You should join the Liberal Party and make sure that the branch and the electorate councils in your area have more right-thinking people like you to get better candidates into the government when you win the election. So it's always coming back to us. But it is on the Liberal Party. Terribly disappointed that they haven't vehemently come out and said, with or without amendments, like, we're happy to try and make this terrible bill better, but it's a terrible bill, so we're going to vote against it. That should have been every right-thinking politician's position on this terribly illiberal, misbegotten legislation right from the beginning. It should have been a complete consensus, and Michael O'Brien failed to lead his party to a strong, effective criticism of this and the Premier at this opportunity, and that's why he's not going to win the next election either.
Hold on.
Of course, this is...
Correct me.
Oh, well, Michael O'Brien's been very clear about the failings of this bill and the amendments that are being put up, the coercive nature of this bill, forcing the medical profession, counsellors, religious communities to not provide counselling that people are seeking out of unwanted same-sex attraction or to deal with gender dysphoria. Those criticisms by the opposition leader have been very clearly put. But what people need to, and what the ALP should be actually very afraid of, is that this legislation has actually woken up a lot of communities, all different types of faith communities. We're talking about from the Hindus to the Muslims to various Christian denominations to the Sikh community. They are all up in arms, petition after petition. Yeah. People, thousands and thousands of people, every MP almost that spoke in Parliament today talked about the thousands upon thousands of calls and emails they've received from community groups. People are aware, and that kind of momentum, if it keeps going till election time.
And this is where it needs to. It needs to be a community reaction that offers the Liberal Party stick or carrot. We're either going to smack you if you do the wrong thing, or we're going to reward you if you do the right thing. Now, let me clarify my comments on Michael O'Brien. It's reported in The Age on Monday that while publicly insisting his party harboured only technical concerns about some parts of the bill, he has struggled to bridge the gap between his party's most conservative MPs and the rest of the party room. Quote, "The problem isn't with banning gay conversion therapy because I don't know anybody who supports that." End quote. Quote, "We can get this done. We can get gay conversion therapy banned," which I think everybody supports, but let's do it in a way that doesn't have a whole lot of unintended consequences. That kind of, end quote, that kind of conditional objection to technicalities isn't what was needed here. That's weak. This is entirely misbegotten. It's a solution looking for a problem. The entire legislation is nothing but illiberal, anti-Menzian, anti-democratic, anti-freedom. It's cancer on Victoria, and that's what Michael O'Brien should have said, not we've got technical concerns and everybody supports a ban.
Well, it is important that, and all MPs have basically stated today in their speeches that they are opposed to conversion therapy. So what people think about when they, when the word or the term conversion therapy is raised is essentially torture, electroconvulsive therapy, all kinds of, mutilation of people, very much torture. And that is what people understand it to be, the community's mind. People don't think that when the government uses the term conversion therapy, that they're also referring to counselling that someone might voluntarily, of their own free will, adults, go out and seek. They don't think that the government would be interfering in that way.
That's right.
But it is that, therefore, very important that people like Michael O'Brien state their opposition to forms of torture, because the government very clearly and cleverly have included that conversion therapy in the name of their bill, to make it seem that if you oppose the bill, that you somehow condone torture on people.
Well, I think what happens is that Michael O'Brien should have actually, as the leader of the opposition, should have come in and said, listen, we have historical gay conversion therapy. And that historical gay conversion therapy is no longer happening in this country, and it hasn't for a long time. But we do have other therapy, and therapy does convert people. It converts very angry people, hopefully, to peaceful people. It converts insecure people to secure people. That's what therapy is about. It's about an opportunity to be able to go in and to explore different issues and find a sense of resolution, a sense of authenticity and integrity in one's own life. So to some extent, all therapy is about conversion. So therefore, this is a play on words. Now, I realize the Labour government, and particularly LGBTQ protagonists, they have very, very deliberately worded things and this harmful therapy, etc., the rest of it, to make out that all therapy is harmful. So nobody anywhere can move in any direction but one direction. And that's what Professor Whitehall was saying and you were discussing earlier on. This is what's dangerous. It's suddenly, it's not about praying the gay away. They're preying upon our kids to be gay and to be trans and to stay there forever. And that's the harmful thing that we need to be screaming about. And we can't be silent about this if this law is passed. We must all speak up and say, no, 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 no. Come to jail with me.
That's right. Your final thoughts, Professor Whitehall? I think we might have a terrible internet connection there. Go ahead, Professor Whitehall.
Yeah, I missed the question. I'm sorry. I do have bad connection. I don't know.
Just your final thoughts.
Let me just. My final thoughts. Okay, you said before that you didn't think there would be many prosecutions under this. I think that that's not reassuring, because they have created a special. As Lenin, I'm not saying they're communists, but there's a good analogy here. Lenin, when he got into power, created the Cheka, or the secret police, in order to do what the government wanted. So in a sense, this commission is like Lenin's secret police. It has the power to enter your belonging, your building, your office, your home, to check through all your records, check up on what you have allegedly said, work out what harms you have allegedly done to the people, and work out appropriate punishments that it will advise to the government. This is a kind of an extrajudicial, just like the Cheka, unaccountable force. Now, the very fact that we know that is there is intimidating, and that's probably one of its major purposes. What doctors are going to stand up and risk their lives, their families' economic future by standing in the way of this conversion therapy for children? It's going to be much easier just to give in to the intimidation and say, okay, fine. The final thing that the secret police of the Communist Party did was, of course, the education camps. They're known for these re-education camps. And then, one way or another, we would all be submitted to the various doctrines that they wanted to impose upon us. So I'd end on that Leninist note. Leninist morality and Leninist practice in form of the secret police, a la Melbourne, Victoria today.
Yeah, indeed. Professor John Whitehall, thank you so much for your expert contributions tonight. Your very, very long career in the field of treating these people and speaking about the science of, or the lack of scientific support for this legislation and ideology. Appreciate your time, and
Can I just correct something there? Let me just correct something important. I haven't been involved in treating these children. My role has been pursuit of the literature, reading the literature, going to the places where research is being performed, and pointing people to what's there in the written word. Long career in pediatrics, a wonderful privilege of life, but I can't claim to have treated these children. Talked to lots of people, I agree, done more reading. And what's what I can't understand, why the gender clinics don't read the stuff which is there to be read?
Well, the lack of experience, I've heard you speak before, the lack of experience with gender dysphoria in your patients and that of your colleagues is an artifact of the reality that it is so exceptionally rare without this social construction of these modern problems. Professor Whitehall, thank you so much for your time.
It used to be very... You're welcome.
There's a huge delay there, and Professor Whitehall is fascinating to talk to. If you haven't heard him speak before, try and find some on the internet. There should be plenty there, or get along to it. Let's bring back our entire panel. Still with us, Terri Kelleher, James Parker, Karina Okotel, regular Good Source contributor. James, I think you were going to say something just before we said good night to Professor Whitehall.
I just said I just honestly believe that we need to just keep stirring the pot on this. We need to do this for the sake of children. I'm always thinking about the children, and that's what Professor Whitehall, whenever I read the excellent articles that he writes and hear him speak, he is a robust man. He's everything that's good about Australia. And he has a heart for the children. And my last word to each one of us here and to those watching and listening this evening is let's not forget the children. We mustn't forget the children.
Yeah, very, very good. Now, there's a comment from Erica Grace that I want to bring up. And I knew an Erica Grace when I was a child. I don't know if it's a common name, but if you're the same person, send us an extra message because I'd like to catch up and say g'day. But thank you for this comment, Erica Grace, who did leave it. The government has not respected the separation between church and politics. They have encroached into the church and its reason for being. It is not acceptable. Erica, you're 100% right. And there is a summit coming up in 3 weeks, very close now, the Church and State Summit. And that is being held in Brisbane and Hobart and online. And you can get tickets for that at churchandstate.com.au. The reason I mentioned that is because at that summit, the Australian director of the Australian Christian Lobby, Martin Iles, is going to be speaking to that topic specifically, that we have governments like Victoria and the ACT and Queensland, increasingly around Australia, who are actually interfering in the way the church is run, what we believe, what we teach, how we minister, how we preach, how we counsel those people who come to us and ask for pastoral care. The government, the state is actively transgressing that wall of separation that should exist between the church and the state. And that wall of separation that Thomas Jefferson first referred to was to protect the church from the government, not the other way around. The government does not need protection from the church. In fact, democracy invites Christians and people of faith to participate fully. But clearly, as Daniel Andrews, #DictatorDan, is proving, the church and Christianity needs protection from the government. So how dare you tell us we may not pray within such and such distance of an abortion clinic? How dare you tell free people that they may not seek or offer talk therapy for unwanted feelings and emotional conditions? That is absolutely a transgression of that natural law definition. So well said, Erica. Mama says, thanks, James, for pointing out specific communist goals that are in keeping with Gramsci's plan for the march through the institutions. Let's head around. I'm not sure if we should keep pushing this conversation for a while. I think it's been full and had some good momentum. So I don't mind doing that. But has anybody got anything to take us to now? Karina, any thoughts from you on topics or questions left untouched or unfinished? Oh, you're muted. Sorry, Karina.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to point out that, these types of discussions that we're having right now, if someone were to, for example, recommend that someone watch this show because they are having unwanted same-sex attraction or gender dysphoria, and they might accompany that with suggesting that they might want to explore, let's say, detransitioning or the like, not affirming a same-sex attraction or not affirming a gender transition pathway. This would be illegal. So, you know, in Victoria, after tonight, if the bill passes without amendments, we're, you know, towing a very fine line in terms of these types of discussions. It really is, we're in a dire space in Victoria at the moment. We've seen pieces of legislation coming up that are constantly undermining and eroding our freedoms here in Victoria. I hope that this doesn't continue to happen around the country. As I think Terri mentioned earlier, legislation on conversion therapy has already passed in Queensland and the ACT. James can speak more to legislation probably on the horizon in Western Australia. There's concerns about what's coming up in Tasmania. You know, in New South Wales, you know, it's just a matter of time, really. South Australia, it's already basically on the cards. But each piece of legislation that's come up, first Queensland, then the ACT, now Victoria, it pushes the boundaries more and more. First in Queensland, it started with regulation of the medical profession. Then in the ACT, it broadened who might be captured and what might be unlawful. Now in Victoria, there's specific words in the legislation, well, soon to be probably legislation, the bill that regulates prayer. For the first time, I think probably around the world, there will be legislation that says what it is you can and can't pray for. The boundaries keep being pushed. If we don't continue to push back, we're going to see worse and worse happening as this trend continues around the country.
Terri, any final thoughts from you?
Yes, just two. And as Karina says, we have to continue to fight and we have to push back. And we have to remember that it's really the Liberal Party, whether you like it or not, that gives us the hope. And they did stand up and they did form a platform. And this is what I was saying, Karina will bear me out right from the start of this, that if they didn't get up and really argue for amendments, which they have done very, very well, very capably, then they wouldn't have any platform on which to say, well, we're going to revisit this legislation when they're returned to government. So why would we bother, you know, trying to get them returned to government? So I think that we have to bear that in mind and we have to work with what is. But they did a very, very good job. And we can go back through the transcript and see exactly, you know, all of the points that they made, and they will be put into a brief so we know what we're going to be asking of them. The second point is I'd like to make the point that, you know, the people whose stories and testimonies are on Free to Change and people who are who've detransitioned or have had counselling for same-sex attraction, for issues they have around that, they won't be able to share their stories. I think they would be considered change or suppression practices to share those stories, because it's certainly inviting people to consider changing their sexual identity or same-sex attraction or suppressing it or their gender identity. So just think on that. That is how draconian and authoritarian it is.
Absolutely. James, where can people find more from you, the work you do and have done, and more of the stories sharing what people like you have gone through, so you won't be erased?
Well, you could just type in the words James Parker and probably even the word ex-gay into YouTube or into Google or whatever, and a number of different articles and videos and different things will come up. There's also several other websites. One is called changedmovement.com, changedmovement.com. And there are literally hundreds of stories from people in, I think, more than 50 countries around the world who are all testifying to their transition from the gay community or from the trans community out into something that they regard as more authentic. And this isn't even about changing same-sex attraction. I want to say that very clearly. This is about the opportunity for people just to live a life of authenticity and integrity in the way that they choose to live it. Many people are still same-sex attracted, or they may still be questioning their gender, but they've got every right to make their own choice. So Change Movement is one. TrueLove.is is another one. TrueLove.is is another one with some great videos. A third one is twoprisms.com. And a fourth one is sexchangeregret.com. They're all wonderful, wonderful websites. Let me say those again: changemovement.com, twoprisms.com, True Love is, and sexchangeregret.com.
Just adding everybody back. Sorry, I'm pressing the wrong buttons here. James, it's I'm sure you get encouragement a lot from, I guess, the right kind of audience, people who are sick of being bombarded with the progressive agenda and the mainstream media's enjoining that narrative. But certainly it's refreshing, and all the comments tonight have agreed. Wonderfully encouraging and uplifting to hear your positive story of talk therapy and dealing with becoming a whole person, healthy on every level, admitting, acknowledging and embracing those parts of your life which were broken and needing therapy, and then getting restoration and wholeness in it. That is fantastic. And surely that's the whole basis of healthcare, of treating and therapeutically handling those things which are not ideal in us, instead of pretending brokenness is normal.
That's
so
right.
It's
Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic. So thank you very much, Terri. Thank you for your expert contributions tonight and your to the debate. And thank you to my partner in thought crime, Karina Okotel.
Thanks again, Dave.
Thank you.
Head to the Good Source website. You'll be able to find Karina's articles, and James and Terri, if you have any articles you'd like to contribute at any stage, we would gladly publish those and share those as well. But that's it for Not Q&A tonight. And we would like to invite you to share this show with your friends. Make sure you let them know there's no need to suffer through that horrible offering on their ABC now on the same night as us. You can just watch the Good Sources, not Q&A, and that will make your life saner, your intellect sharper, and your country better. So thank you very much, and we will see you on the Good Source.